good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us and welcome to this workshop on imagining the future of learning, bringing your idea to life. There is a focus on how to help you enter SI's Innovation Challenge around the future of learning, but equally, I think what we're about to do could inform any work you do going forward in terms of dissertations, projects, spotting opportunities for new venture creation, because the tools and techniques don't just apply to imagining the future of learning, they will allow you to imagine any future. Okay, so just a quick recap on the Festival of Innovation Challenge. You have to create a short 2 to 3 minute video of your vision of the future of learning in 5 years' time, illustrate a day in the life of a learner in 5 years' time, and being asked to create a story that will trigger some emotional responses from different stakeholders, in effect create a prototype. And that's very much what we're going to focus on in this workshop. We're going to look at how do you trigger some emotional responses from stakeholders? How do you make sure that your video has an impact? And the reason why we're sort of stressing that we want your videos to trigger some emotional responses, that's not just for the judging. That's because we want to actually share your ideas with our stakeholders, working in academia and working in the government and working in policy, to say, here's what the students imagine the future of learning to be. We're going to sort of what we call consciously create, design and unleash your possible futures into the present day to allow SI to facilitate with different stakeholders how we talk about the future of learning, and not settling for this is fine. It's a phrase we hear in the current climate. So that's why we're setting this challenge. We think it's very, very important given the current situation with COVID-19. It has started us thinking about how do we actually start to delivering learning in the future. I was speaking to an academic yesterday and she was quoting back one of her students who said, once you take away the bricks and mortar and the tick beside an exam, you're left with knowledge and community. So how do universities start to build that into learning? And I think for some of you who maybe joined us for the last workshop, we talked a lot about the power of imagining the future. And if we start to imagine the future, it elevates our thinking from what is currently happening. It increases our chances of being really innovative and really changing the status quo. And again, some of you might recognise this slide from the last workshop. But the reason why we want you to imagine the future and not just come up with new ideas is we want you in your video to set out giving people viewing your video an experience of a possible future around learning. Now, this is a photograph taken by a photographer called Meredith Hutchinson called Vision Not Victim. And her whole plan behind this was to actually give Syrian refugees an experience, to actually experience their future. So in this picture, this young child is in a classroom and she is experiencing a possible future for herself. So that's why we want you to create this video around your imagination of the future of learning, because we want your video to be able to allow people to experience a future. And it's really important because, believe it or not, the future is urgent. I talked a little bit about COVID-19. That's thrown up a lot of discrepancies in education, disparity, lack of inclusion, people not having access to the internet, etc., to textbooks. And also we talked a little bit about the United Nations Sustainability Goals. The future is urgent. And this is one of my favourite quotes. Some of you may know I do like a quote, but this is a really interesting gentleman called Bucky Fuller. And he said, if we want to change the future and act on the future, then we have to change how we talk about it. And that's what we want your videos to do. We want these videos to be part of that new conversation about the future of learning. And the best way I can think get this across to you is we want your videos to build a bridge from the present to the future, something that allows people to step into a possible future, experience it, and start some new conversations around what is possible. And this is just a graphic that I use. Sometimes when we are looking for ideas, we speculate a little bit. We say, well, people will use these. We'll build a prototype and people will use these. But experiential videos and learning is all about people, actually immersing themselves in a situation, and then they start to speculate about what the possible new products and services should be. So rather than sort of speculate and experience a product or service, your video should allow people to experience a scenario, a scene, and be aware of what's needed to make that particular scene happen. So just some quick aims. We're going to provide you with some tools and techniques to help you develop the content and story for your video. I am not an expert in any means about how to put a video together, but I think any good video needs a framework, it needs a storyboard, it needs content, and that's really what this workshop is going to do. Increase your chances of your video triggering an emotional response, and effectively, your video is a prototype. You're actually, by allowing people to experience a possible future of learning with your video, it's a prototype, it's the first model, it's an experiment. And I'll come back at the end to how your video doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be a fully fledged, this is what the future of learning should look like, full stop, okay? Think about that prototype mentality, about building an experiment and getting it out there for people to engage with. So again, just a quick recap on the last workshop. Now, what I want to reiterate at this point is you do not have to have done the last workshop to be able to get something out of this workshop and to enter the challenge. I do recommend that it is worthwhile going back and having a listen to the audio if you are still at a stage where you're looking for inspiration. But just to recap in the last workshop, we talked a little bit about what you need to do to understand the pace of change and how that might influence a vision you have for the future of learning. And we talked a little bit about the factors driving change, and we worked with this graphic. And you'll find this in the last slides, but I'll talk a little bit about this graphic in terms of how you might use it. So I think your video needs a platform. You need something to start it off. How do you kickstart your story? Where do you start? Every good novel, if you like, needs a good opening line and a good chapter, and your video is no exception. So this is a graphic we used in the last workshop where we mapped the factors that influence the change and how that change might impact upon a sector like the future of learning. And we talked about the push of the present, and these are the things that are happening now. COVID-19, other big trends like technology, artificial intelligence, social trends like increasing population, other technology trends like mobile technology. And then we talked a little bit about other pushes of the present can be found in small innovations that are already in existence. We call these signals. And Marty is a startup that SI has been involved with called Robotical. And Marty allows students to build an artificial intelligence powered robot in the classroom to teach them about coding. Kaitabu is another startup from Africa that allows students to rent pages from a textbook rather than buy an expensive textbook. And Learn is an app that allows people to code in different places at different times in bite-sized pieces. And we also have growing awareness of the United Nations Sustainability Goals. So think of the push of the present as those big trends out there: technology, political, economic changes, social changes, for example, increasing population, wanting access to education, but also think of the push of the present as being those small innovations that are already out there in the margins that have the potential to disrupt the status quo. And then we've got the pool of the future, and the goals can also appear there too. Those goals are an agenda. Most of the world's countries have signed up to them to say, yes, we will make these goals happen. By 2030, we will be working towards those goals having been implemented. Others, people's visions of the future, government strategy. So things that the pool of the future, things we aspire to, things that we're working towards, goals that have been set. And the weight of history, not to be discounted, but that's things like infrastructure, things that exist already like expensive campuses, business models that require students turning up and paying fees, historical connections. We can get really attached to the historical culture around an institution we're studying at, and things like the law of physics, science, things we can't change like time differences. As I said at the last workshop, I attended a course in July, and there was people in San Francisco logging on at 9 a.m, people on the East Coast in New York logging on at 2 p.m, me logging on at 5 p.m, and people in Asia logging on at 1 a.m. in the following day. So things like that we can't change. These are things that we actually have to deal with sometimes if we're looking at the future of learning. And we talked a little bit about those changes being equal on that previous graph, but it's like cat's cradle. Some of those pushes and pulls and weights of history will have different strengths at different times and therefore different influences. Okay, so when we did the last workshop, we finished off by doing an exercise called world building using our triangle there. Now, again, if you're joining us not having done the previous workshop, don't worry, make this your starting point. For those of you who did do the previous workshop, you know how we actually took some of the sort of strongest pushes and pulls, and we worked with them to create a what-if statement. So, for example, let me just, if you don't mind if I just flick back a little bit to a previous slide, you'll notice there in push of the present, I had artificial intelligence. I think that is a really strong push that's coming from the future. So what I did was I did a what-if statement, and that's a really good platform to start if you are looking to imagine a future. So again, if you did the previous workshop, hopefully you're doing some of your what-if statements already. If you didn't do the previous workshop, you can go back and look at the stuff. It's from the last workshop, it's all there, but just be bold. Do a what-if statement around the future of learning, some aspect of the future of learning. So here's my bold statement. What if all learning environments will feature in robots in 5 years' time? And then what I go to do is I pull out some consequences from that. Now, this is where you actually start to use your imagination, but you've got a really strong what-if statement. Draw out the first consequence from that. All educators will know how to code. Call out second and third consequences from that. 6 students can be represented by their personal robot in the classroom. So really be bold. Start pulling out the consequences. Use that what-if statement as your platform to start the imagination process. And if you have any specific ideas of your own, you can add these into this narrative. For example, if you're sitting on an idea for a new product or service for learning, add it into this narrative. And then I gave another example of COVID-19. My what-if statement is all regional learning institutions will focus on regional economic recovery and prosperity. And I pulled out the consequences from that. So what I would say is if you are already working on your what-if statements, having attended the last workshop, fantastic. If you are joining us for the first time, get your what-if statement down, whether that's using the stuff from the previous workshop or whether you're just going to be bold and go, what if the future of learning involves this? Use your what-if statement as your platform, your sort of stepping stone, if you like. Okay, so we're going to run through a case study to show how you can take your what-if statement, start to build a world around that, and then start to build what we call a scenario, a scene, populate it with what we call the stuff. And by the time you've gone through those 4 steps, you will have a rich pot of content for your video, things that can inform how you might tell a story, how you might put your slides together. And we've got Fiona Godsman here from SIE, and she can maybe share some insights into possibly some online tools that can help you develop your video as well. So these are the 4 stages we're going to go through. World building, the scenario, starting to narrate your future, a scene, which is almost a simulation, if you like, of your future, and then what I call the stuff, the tangible artifacts that populate this scene. So coming back to this concept of world building, I'm going to take, for our case study purposes, selecting from that How Change Happens template, the triangle of the influential pool of the future, the United Nations Sustainability Goal 13. And the what-if statement, and there's no right or wrong answer here, you have to be bold. All education in 5 years' time will teach climate action as a life skill. So in the same way that in education, we get guidance around sex education, money, life skills will include how to be a good climate activist, how to care for the environment. And I've pulled out the consequences very quickly from this, that climate action will be part of the curriculum. There could be relevant qualifications in the curriculum around climate action. There could be new types of teacher, new types of classrooms, but there could also be more rules and regulations on campus re the use of plastic. So not only will students be taught about climate action, but we'll maybe have campuses heavily involved in a zero waste campus as well, so they practice what they preach. Okay, so case study. We've got that world building, we've got that narrative, if you like, those consequences. And what we want to do is we want to turn these consequences into a scenario around which you're going to start thinking about crafting your business, your video. So I've gone deep here. You'll notice that I have been quite specific about the age of the school pupils. I've been quite specific about what they're going to be taught. And I've made it as real as possible. So what I'd like to say to you here is, once you've got your consequences from your what if statements, and you're starting to turn those into a scene or scenario, go deep. Be quite specific about age group, the customer segment, if you like, that you're going after. Now, it just so happens that I've picked school pupils aged 12 to 18, but I could equally have gone from people studying at college, at university, aged 18 to 25, okay? But for the purposes of this case study, I have sought to stay with school pupils aged 12 to 18. And I also think it's quite a good idea to sort of keep your imagination at a high level, sort of what we call flex your imagination muscle, is give your scenario a name. Now, actually, I have called my scenario living and growing, partly because I made the analogy that students would be taught climate action in the same way they'd be given sex education. And living and growing was the name of the sex education program that I had to go through at school many, many decades ago. So that's why I've come up with that name. But sometimes it's quite helpful to boost that imagination process to give your scenario a name. And it's not, too difficult. There's 3 brief bullet points, and hopefully that gets across to you what my scenario is. Pupils aged 12 to 18 taught about climate action as a life skill. That life skill will be embedded in the curriculum. Schools will be ranked on how well they teach it. And I've given my scenario a name. Now, the next step after that, once you've taken your world building narrative and put that into a scenario around a specific group of people and a specific situation, start to develop a scene. And this is the scene that you really want your video to capture. This is the scene that you think will build the strongest bridge from the present into your future scenario and will allow people to really experience it. You want it to be evocative and you want it to trigger emotional connection with people. So, basically, building a scene. Select a hero and identify what they value. For example, saving the planet, getting a good job they will value, passing their exams, keeping well, making friends. Then identify 2 to 3 special moments. Now, I've done this at a school situation, but those school special moments could relate to another particular learning scene, okay? For example, first day, school prize giving, sitting exams and school trips. And then identify 2 to 3 mundane, everyday activities that you would associate with school that are going to shine a light on how different this scene is from the present. For example, what classroom are they in? Who is teaching them? How are they learning these skills in practice? So just to reiterate, select a hero. So I'm going to select a hero from my demographic of somebody at school from 12 to 18. I'm going to identify some special moments at school for somebody aged between 12 and 18, and I'm going to identify some mundane everyday activities for somebody aged 12 to 18 at school. And this is my future scene, okay? This is my future scene that flows from the scenario that I presented to you. Now, apologies, it's in text format, okay? We're doing these slides as a handout for people joining us at a later stage. So I I could have put this into a storyboard, but I'm just putting it down in text just for teaching purposes here. So look, I've picked my hero. Jamie is 15 years old and is already applying to university to study business. Here's what they value. They care passionately about the environment. They're boycotting shops they know to have an unethical supply chain, and they're studying a level 5 in environmental studies. Now, for some of you joining us who are not Scottish based, that's a typical sort of 4th year qualification at Scottish schools. I've just made it level 5. The curriculum includes 2 times 2 hour sessions a week. They include talks from employers and how they manage their supply chains. Jamie is also taking art and has to use a common waste material in their assessed coursework. They have to work on a local cleanup project as part of their studies. And I've also given them a bit of a sort of personality. Jamie is so shy. This has helped them make friends around a common purpose, as first day of a new term involves volunteering. So remember those special moments of first day at school, first day back? Volunteering for a community project is part of Jamie's first day back at school. So this is the future scene flowing from our future scenario. And, you know, I populated that with a picture that, you know, thank you to Raleigh, was easily available on the website. Again, I'm expanding a little bit. Jamie brings his family's plastic waste into school, which is then used in the school 3D printer. The family gets points that can be used towards school trips. So they're another sort of special moment in school, is going on school trips. The school rewards pupils for their contribution to the environment, and pupils are fined for bringing disposable water bottles into school. This has caused problems with parents, but the school operates a zero tolerance policy. The rewards are monthly and announced at the school assembly. So again, school assembly is quite mundane, at least they were in my day. So again, my scene, although it's future, it's got some of those special and mundane moments that we associate with school in that particular scene. And here's why. Some of you have heard me use this phrase about don't break the universe. If you're wanting people to engage with your image of the future, you have to manage what we call their cognitive overload. You can't overload them. So for example, if I had a scene, if my scene had been around robots teaching people via chips embedded in people's heads, that's too much for people to take in. Okay, it's what we call cognitive overload. The best videos that get people thinking about the future, or any scenarios or scenes that are presented about the future that build that bridge, that allow people to experience a future in a way that they want to act on it, is that you start to put unusual content into a familiar form. So for example, I had the very familiar form of paying for a school trip. A school trip is something we all know about. But I've got the unusual content of paying with it by plastic waste. The plastic waste that Jamie brings into school gives him points, or her points, that they pay for their school trips. Okay, so I've got familiar form like a school trip, and then I've got the unusual content in terms of how they pay for that. And we kind of get that. We go, oh, I can manage that. Or what I do is I put familiar content like curriculum classes in an unusual context. So for example, we know that people have a curriculum, they take classes during the school week, but the unusual context here is that they're occurring out of class. There is a volunteering project that Jamie has to take part in as part of his studies, if you like, in environmental management. And I've gone deep. I've given Jamie an age, ambitions, personality, and the scenes that I presented to you there are rooted in what we call special and mundane moments. First day at school, ambitions, but also things like studying for exams and going to school assembly. And I know that I am sort of putting this across quite passionately, but having presented a number of future scenarios to different stakeholders over the last 5 years, the most successful ones are where you don't overload people with too much information. It's not, oh my God, this is too futuristic. And just in case you're wondering what that little picture is there, it's not to do with learning, but I just liked it as something that's happening in practice, is This is a well-known cereal company in the States called Cinnamon Toast Crunch. They were looking to get across the future is going to be, we're going to have selfie spoons that our little cameras are going to be attached to our cutlery because we're so fond of sending out pictures of what we're eating. So we might think, oh, yeah, I kind of get that. It's futuristic, but I understand the concept of a selfie spoon, but it's related to a really clear brand in people's minds already. So they're more inclined to engage with this idea of a selfie spoon because you've got that well-known current brand, you've got that familiar content. It's just the selfie spoon that's unusual. So I hope that makes sense. We'll hang on at the end for any questions. But what I just want to stress to you is don't make your videos too futuristic. If you can link something unusual to something that exists already, people are more likely to engage with it. Okay, and when you're doing your scenes, don't leave it to chance that people will have the emotional response that you want them to have. Think about the mood that you want to create in your scene. So if you think about our case study scene, I would like to think that maybe it makes you feel upbeat about it. We're developing the new change makers of the world. Maybe it makes you feel motivated. Oh, right, yeah, this is what we can do. Schools have a part to play in this. But maybe it makes you feel frustrated and annoyed. For example, I put into that scene that the school the zero tolerance policy. Maybe it's not that easy for all school children to bring in foodstuff in material that can be recycled. Maybe the only option they have is to bring in, for example, sandwiches wrapped in cling film that they buy from a local shop. Their parents can't make them pack lunches in sustainable format. So just take a moment, and you're welcome to post it in chat. Just look at the scene that maybe we put down there around Jamie and just think about what emotions did that evoke in you. Now, all emotions are valid. For example, I might look at that scene that I presented around Jamie and say, oh God, a lot more has to be done to help schools, help children become more sustainable. It's not enough just to be draconian and say, let's ban everything. Okay, so just have a little think about how that scene possibly made you feel. You can do it now and post in chat, or you can maybe look at the slides at a later stage and just think about yourself engaging with that scene and what emotions did it make you feel, okay? But be clear from the outset what emotions you want to evoke in the people viewing your video. Don't leave it to chance. Because that's what you want to do. You know, you want them to have that experience. You want them to step into the life of Jamie. You want them to feel what Jamie's feeling, what Jamie's trying to do, what the school's trying to do. It's almost like walking in their future shoes. Okay. So what we want to do is we want to really make your scene come to life as well, okay? There's another step that we can do to bring your idea to life, to make your scene pop, to trigger extra emotional responses from people. And that's working with something called artifacts of the future. And artifacts are a bit like if you look at history, people dig things up from the ground. They dig up a cooking utensil or a piece of jewellery, and they're able to say from this is how somebody lived and ate and dressed in the year whatever. Artifacts or products and services are almost like things that you dig up from the future to say this is what the future could look like and feel. And I think they play a really important part in your video. They can strengthen the future you want to communicate by saying this is how the future could look and feel. You're starting to trigger a whole different level of response from people viewing your video, and they can help make your scene more tangible. And it doesn't have to be anything too complicated. This is an artifact of the future. It's in a format that we might recognise. It looks like a typical timetable, but this is Jamie's timetable for his level 5 environmental studies that's being run in 2025. Jamie is part of that year 2025. And all we've done here for this artifact of the future that enhances the scene we've created around Jamie is just populated it with some of the classes that he's attending or she's attending. So 2 to 4 p.m, they're going to a class on ethical supply chains, delivered by not a typical teacher, but by a company called Ethos Fashion. Wednesday, 12 to 1, Jamie is going to be working in the Climate Victory Garden at local old people's home. Climate Victory Garden, for some of you who are not aware of that term, is gardens that are planted to sort of show we're winning a war on something. And it's something that's emerged in the States a little bit around, let's build a garden to make sure we're contributing our bit to the environment. So Jamie is 12 to 1, he's out of the classroom, he's learning in a different environment with different teachers. Thursday, meeting with art tutor to discuss waste material to be used in project. So in other words, Jamie's got to do an art project that involves using a specific waste material that would normally just go to landfill. We've got assembly on Friday called Everyone's a Change Maker. So again, they're going to a different type of assembly where they're being sort of encouraged to be change makers. And then 9:30 to 11:30, he's got another part of his curriculum, which is changing people's behaviour and cycling, taught by the local council rubbish collection department. They're responsible for recycling. They're the ones that collect the rubbish. They're the ones that are trying to get people to recycle. So again, something very, very normal, like a timetable, is populated with unusual content. And we've got our artefact of the future that just brings Jamie's timetable to life, or hopefully. Now that is just me having the initial run through it. It's very 2D. You can bring your own creative processes to how you might produce something like a timetable as an artefact of the future. And also I put this in because I think that I wanted to show that a lot of images are readily available off the internet as well. So this is another artefact that I would like to populate that scene. So in that scene, we talked a lot about the school having a zero policy on plastic waste coming into the school. They want pupils to stop using plastic as much as possible. This is a plastic water cooler that's got a date at the top called 2030, and in it is a massive amount of plastic. And what this artefact of the future is an educational tool that says to people, if we continue to use the amount of disposable plastic we are using, this is the amount of plastic you can expect to find in your drinking water. So again, another artefact of the future around the school having this educational policy on non-plastic use. Now, this is another picture which effectively can be an artefact of the future as well. I took this off the website. Now, obviously, it doesn't necessarily relate to Jamie's school, but what I wanted to get across is this idea of paying for tuition with plastic is already in force. This is a little picture from the Ashoka School in India, and it has a very bad problem in the area the school is situated in, where people are also burning their plastic waste, and each pupil has to bring 25 items to school a week. Their education is free anyway, but what the people say is this bringing the plastic waste to school is bringing a real community sense of action around helping the environment. So I've got a picture here from the Ashoka School, but if I'd longer, I might have crafted a picture of Jamie in his school bag overflowing with plastic waste, or his mum handing over a bag of plastic waste for Jamie to take to school, or the 3D printer where it's being used, okay? So be as illustrative as you can. This is just my attempt at pulling some pictures off the internet, okay? So to summarize, start with what-if statements. Either if you're using the material from the previous workshop and the world building exercise, even if you're coming to this workshop for the first time, start with a what-if statement. What if the world of learning in 5 years' time was this? Pull out the consequences, okay? All the different consequences. And we talked a little bit earlier about all teachers being able to code. From your scenario or narrative, start then to tell a story or a scene. Create a scene that will get people engaging with your scenario on an emotional level. It doesn't have to be all positive. People can experience negative emotions, and that can be good because they say, guess what, I don't want that future, I need to act now. So basically, it can be a scene that has things that generate both positive and negative. If people see something positive, they can go, we want that, let's act now. If they see something negative, they can go, we don't want that, let's act now. Then once you've done that, use the stuff or artifacts of the future to enhance people's engagement with your vision of the future. Artifacts that are sort of little products or services that just give that little bit more depth to your video. And I pulled a lot of stuff off the internet, pictures. It doesn't have to be something that you have to design from scratch and then photograph. Think about how you might get across an artifact. It could be somebody just talking to its use. It could be something as simple as a timetable that just has unusual content. Don't feel you've got to go and create a minimum viable product. It's just something visually that captures an artifact of the future or captures it audibly, okay? And then once you have your scene and you have your artifacts, you now have some really good material around which to start planning how you're going to capture all that in your video, how you're going to tell the story in your scene using the person or hero in it and the artifacts that that person is using it. Now, as I said, video, it can be using slides with audio, it can be pictures, it can be images, it could be mock interviews, it could be rough prototypes, really whatever you want to do, as long as you think that somebody can get a good experience of the future from your video. Fiona, do you want to add something about a tool that you've been using?
Well, I've been playing around recently just creating my own videos, and I've been using canva.com, which you're probably familiar with already, but it's really easy to use. So if you're not great at putting videos together, if I can do it, anyone can.
Yeah. But that's really what we want to get across is, we're not looking for an amazingly directed video, all singing, all dancing. As long as you can get across your scene in a way that people can understand it, they can engage with the hero, they can understand what that hero is trying to do in the future. Anything goes, okay? And I just wanted to reiterate, you think about the judging criteria, we've covered that. If you follow the process that we've just gone through, of world building using a what if statement. If you then build your scenario, then you develop a scene taken from that scenario, that you then populate that scene with artifacts of the future. You are ticking all the judging criteria. So you think about it in that case study, who they are. Jamie represents a typical 15-year-old studying at school. Where they're learning on campus. They're also learning in the Victory Garden of the Old People's Home. How are they learning? They're learning in classes, they're learning in groups, they're learning individually. When are they learning? Typically during school term time. And what are they learning? They're learning about climate action. But if you notice a little bit as well, Jamie's also learning, how to have a sense of purpose and how to engage with others, how to overcome their shyness, how to have sociability skills. So if you go back and look at that case study, you'll see that it ticks a lot of that judging criteria. Okay, Jamie is quite a real person. We've got across where they're learning, when they're learning, what they're learning. So go deep with your hero. And that takes me on to my next slide. Go deep. Root what you do in a strong sense of place. When you're creating your scene, have a sense of place, have a sense of history, have a sense of culture, values, demographics. I also talked earlier about those special moments in that scene and the mundane moments. Don't overload people who are looking at your video. Avoid new content and new medium, one or the other. So that's really what I was talking about earlier, about the fact that we had the unusual way of paying for school fees. The plastic was the unusual content, but we had the familiar medium of school trips. We all understood that. And this, I know, sounds really daft, but no flashing arrows that says this is the future. Your video should almost look as if this is happening in the present day. Okay, it's almost like timeless. So no flashing arrows to say, oh, this is the future, this is the future. It should always be something we're looking at thinking this could be the present. And again, my favourite phrase of the moment, don't break the universe. Don't forget the weight of history. don't have cyborgs teaching us via chips in our brain. Much as maybe some of you might like that, I don't know. I've had a few students who, might come back to me and say that's the future. But again, you're kind of breaking the universe for people. It's just too much for them. The weight of history is we've got infrastructure, we've got people who probably don't want to be chipped. We've got culture, beliefs around that whole concept of do we want a microchip in our body? So that's just my sort of buzzword. Don't break the universe, and no flashing arrows that say this is the future. Your video should almost look like it belongs in the present. Although it's the future of learning, it should almost belong in the present, and people going, this is what we want. And finally, I'm going into the business of putting quotes and t-shirts, but I do like a quote. Peter Melville, designer, futurist. And it's just a sort of, don't strive for perfection. Now, that may seem a really odd thing to put into a competition, but don't, get really het up about making sure that, you've covered all the bases around what the future of learning could look like with regards to your scenario. Because when you're actually presenting an idea, it's the same situation with prototyping. If you prototype an idea for a product or service and you take that out to your customer, you want to leave room for that customer to engage with that and say, oh, I kind of like that, but I don't, or I like that, but have you thought about maybe changing that a little bit? So in some ways, the laws of prototyping apply here too. What you want is to create something that triggers people engaging with it in a good way. It starts new conversations, but you want to leave room for them to say, oh, there's a gap here. Have you thought about this? We call these rabbit holes, where your video doesn't quite explore all the possibilities, but it gets people exploring those possibilities on your behalf. And I hope that makes sense, is don't feel that you have to cover everything regarding. So I didn't cover everything there about Jamie at school, okay? I just created a scene. I didn't cover umpteen things that Jamie might be doing at school and what he's doing or she's doing, okay? So don't be afraid to just focus on one particular scene, and don't feel you've got to tick all the boxes. If you think there's some sort of what we call rabbit holes there, that's great. We love rabbit holes. That's where the best conversations start. So don't follow the prototyping rules here. Leave some room for people to engage with it, okay? And have some rabbit holes. Happy to answer any questions. I hope that makes sense. The slides have been done out as a handout for you, so you can go back and look at them another time. But very happy to take any questions, or any questions from the team that maybe you want some clarification. Any of the SI team got any questions for me, or does that all make sense?
Hi, Anne. It makes perfect sense to me. I think this has been great. Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else got any questions they want to answer? What I would say to you, ladies and gentlemen, is don't underestimate. I mean, have some fun with this. The first thing to do is have some fun. Imagining the future should be fun. Really think about yourself flexing your imagination muscle. Have some fun with it. See where it takes you. But don't underestimate that, SI is going to use these. We'll be showcasing these at some of a conference that we're running on the 23rd of September. So you are going to have the chance to influence what SI does and what other academics do, but at the same time, have some fun with it and get some new skills. And what I would suggest to you as well is that you don't have to win the competition. Just as long as you enter it, you'll get your Scottish Innovation Student Award at the end of you entering the competition. And that's all about future thinker and how to engage with the pace of change. And if you liked what we did here, then we expand a lot in this at the other levels of CISA, level 2 and level 3. So this is a gateway to CISA level 2 and level 3, which are some great micro-credentials to have in your CV, as is CISA level 1. But have some fun, see where it takes you, and but at the same time, don't underestimate the impact that your imagination of the future could have on what SI is looking to do going forward. Fiona, that's me. Unless Andrew's got anything they want me to answer.
No, just a reminder, and I think you might have one more slide about the Facebook group that's been created. Yeah,
I do.
yeah.
There's some more resources that you can find on our Facebook page. Join and you'll find some more information there about how to get your CISA level 1, how to use some other resources that can help you imagine the future as well. Okay, but if you take away anything from today, start with a what if statement, pull out some consequences from that, build a scenario around those consequences, and then think about a scene that will illustrate that scenario. Go deep, pick a hero, build a typical day in the life around that hero, what they're feeling, what they value, and then populate that scene with some artifacts of the future that bring that scene to life. And as I said, it doesn't have to be minimum viable product, built rough prototype. It can be something as simple as a 2D paper-based timetable or an image taken off the internet. And do have a look at the tool that Fiona was talking about as well. I'm sure your technical skills at putting videos together are a lot better than mine. Great stuff. Thank you very much. Good luck.